Sarnai grew up knowing the sacred drum in her father's room was forbidden, a relic of a legacy she wanted no part of, until the night he died and the drum appeared on her doorstep, beating in a steady, rhythmic cadence despite being hollow and skinless. When she brought it inside, she realized the rhythm wasn't just echoing, it was calling. In the vast, desolate silence of the Mongolian steppe, Sarnai begins to understand that her father's passing wasn't the end of a long illness, but the final payment on a pact made generations ago. This is the story of the inheritance Sarnai never asked for, the drum that requires a keeper who understands the cost of the beat, and the realization that in her family, the debt you don't pay is the one that eventually finds you. The drum was on her doorstep before the sun cleared the ridge, its goatskin face tilted up toward a sky with no clouds and no memory of rain. Sarnai did not touch it. She stood in the doorway of the borrowed house, her cousin's house, the only one that would have her, in her father's province for the first time in 6 years, and she looked at the drum the way you look at something that cannot be where it is. She reached for her phone. She took 7 photographs. The flash lit the goatskin twice, and in the second photograph she could see the moisture on it. Not dew, not frost, just wet, the way skin is wet after a long fever breaks. The khenger was his. She knew it from the proportions first. The larch-wood frame her father had carved himself, wider at the top than the bottom, asymmetrical in a way he said was intentional, that he said the spirits preferred. Then she saw the red thread. It was wound 3 times around the handle, tight and even, the ends tucked under instead of knotted. She had done that herself when she was 9 years old. She remembered the morning clearly. The light through the jar had been the color of old bone, and she had woken from a dream she would not describe to anyone. Her father had placed the thread in her hands, without asking her why she was already awake. He had shown her the tucking, 3 times around, no knot. A knot is a closing, he had said. This is a binding. Different things. She had not thought about that morning in 25 years. The village elder had told her, on the phone, that everything was exactly as it had been left. His robe on the hook, his bowl on the shelf, his second pair of boots under the cot, the left one still holding the shape of his foot. The elder had described each object with the careful inventory of a man reading from a list, and Sarnai had understood that this was not tenderness, it was distance, the practiced recitation of someone who had already decided that what happened in that jar was finished, catalogued, and no longer his concern. She had driven 4 hours from Ulaanbaatar on roads that were half ice, half suggestion, and when she'd arrived at the jar, the neighbors had come out onto their thresholds and then gone back inside without speaking. One woman, older in a blue wool deal, had looked at Sarnai's rental car for a long moment before closing her door slowly, the way people close doors when they want you to know they've seen you. Inside, everything was as described. The robe, the bowl, the boots, the hook where the drum had hung was empty. A length of rope still looped from it, fraying at the cut end, as though someone had removed the drum quickly, with a blade. She spent the first day going through his things the way she'd been taught to grieve in the city. Methodically, without ceremony, folding what could be folded and setting aside what could be given away. She did not cry. She had not cried at the burial either, which she had attended alone, standing 3 meters back from the other mourners, out of something she told herself was respect for their grief and not her own. She slept badly. The borrowed house was thin-walled, and the steppe at night is not quiet. It is full of wind that sounds like someone trying a door they haven't opened in years. In the morning, the drum was on the threshold. She picked it up on the second dawn, because she could not photograph it a third time without feeling something she didn't have a name for yet. It was heavier than she remembered. Or she was weaker. She held it by the handle, the red thread pressing into her palm in 3 distinct lines. Then it hummed. Not from impact. Her hand had not moved. There was no wind. The sound came from inside the frame itself, low, resonant, specific, the way a bell hums after it has been struck, except there had been no striking. 1 note, a second, then silence, the kind of silence that doesn't follow sound so much as replace it, as if the drum had been waiting to be held by exactly these hands and had at last been satisfied. Sarnai stood in the doorway of her cousin's borrowed house and held her father's drum and felt the silence settle into her chest, like something that had always lived there and had simply been away. The first elder told her it had been a Tuesday, sunny. He had been found by a neighbor before noon. The second elder told her it had been a Thursday, overcast. He had been alone for at least 2 days before anyone thought to check. Sarnai wrote both accounts in her phone's notes application, the way she had been trained to record things, without judgment, without insertion, and then sat in her car between visits and stared at the 2 paragraphs until the words stopped meaning anything. She had come to the village with a simple errand: collect what needed collecting, speak to whoever needed speaking to, return to Ulaanbaatar with a clear account of how her father had died. This was the kind of task she was competent at. She was an archivist. She dealt in documents, in provenance, in the careful reconstruction of what had actually happened from what people claimed to remember. She knew how memory worked. She knew that 2 people could witness the same event and produce 2 different stories, and that both could be telling the truth as they experienced it. But Tuesday and Thursday were not a matter of perception. One of them was lying, or both of them were, in the same direction, about something neither had named. The third elder lived at the edge of the settlement, in a ger that was older than the others. The felt darker, the wooden door frame worn smooth at shoulder height, where generations of hands had braced against it. Her name was Gantulga. She was 78, and she had been her father's Ongon Dudaksh, his helper spirit caller, for 30 years before he stopped practicing. Before Sarnai was born, Gantulga opened the door, saw Sarnai's face, and said nothing. She did not invite her in. She looked at Sarnai's hands. "You have it with you," she said. It was not a question. Sarnai unslung the bag from her shoulder. She had not planned to bring the drum. She had decided that morning, with a practical firmness she had not examined, to leave it in the house. She had picked it up on the way out the door, the way you pick up something you already know you'll need. She held it out. Gantulga looked at it for a long moment before touching the rim with 2 fingers. Not the face, not the handle, just the wooden edge, as though testing temperature. Then she pulled her hand back and pressed it flat against her thigh. "He didn't finish the zasal," she said. Sarnai asked what that meant. What followed was the longest 10 minutes of her time in the province. Gantulga spoke slowly, choosing each word with the deliberateness of someone translating, not between languages, but between registers of reality. A zasal was a corrective ritual, not an exorcism, not a healing in the way a city doctor healed, but a rebalancing. The shaman identified what was pulling a person out of alignment and negotiated directly with the source of the pull. It had to be completed within 1 lunar cycle, not because of tradition, because of what happened if it wasn't. "If you stop in the middle," Gantulga said, "the harm doesn't go back where it came from. It goes forward, to the next of blood." Sarnai heard this the way you hear something you already knew stated aloud for the first time, not as new information, as confirmation. "Who was he healing?" she asked. Gantulga looked at her the way the second elder had looked at her rental car. A long look that named something without speaking it. "He never told me the name," she said. "He was very careful about names." The door locked from the inside while Sarnai was still in the frame. She heard the bolt slide before she had finished saying goodbye. She walked back through the settlement in the blue-gray light of late afternoon, her bag over one shoulder, the drum pulling at her arm with its familiar weight. Out of habit, the archivist's habit, the habit of a woman who believed in counting what was there, she glanced down at the dust behind her. 9 prints. 2 sets of 4, hers and something smaller, and then one that was longer than the others, pressed deeper, like something that had been standing still while she moved. The last entry in his journal was not writing. It was pressure, a name begun and then destroyed. The pen driven through the paper so hard that the page beneath it carried the ghost of the letters in blind relief. She found the journal under the cot, inside a wooden box that was not locked, which surprised her. Everything else of his that carried weight had been locked, sealed, wrapped, or bound. The box opened with a simple lift of the lid, as if he had stopped believing, at the end, that keeping things closed would help. The journal was not what she expected. She had imagined something personal, his handwriting loose and confessional, his private thoughts about dying, laid out in the neat columns of a man accounting for himself. Instead, it was a log, terse, coded, professional. Each entry followed the same structure: a date, a set of abbreviated initials that were not quite initials, a description of the zassel performed written in a shorthand she could only partially read, and then a single character, a circle, a cross, or a dash that she understood from context to mean complete, incomplete, or ongoing. Most entries ended in circles. She flipped through them the way you flip through something you are trying not to read carefully. Fast enough to feel like you are looking, slow enough to see if anything catches. Months of sessions, decades maybe. The pages near the back were older, the ink faded to brown, the handwriting smaller and more certain. The pages near the front were newer, the ink dark, the handwriting slightly larger in the way that handwriting gets larger when the eyes begin to go. She stopped at the entry dated 6 weeks before his burial. The abbreviation at the top of the entry was different. Not initials, or not only initials. It looked like a name started and reconsidered, the first 3 letters written, and then a single horizontal strike through them, precise and early, as though he had caught himself doing something dangerous. Below the strike, in the same ink, a different attempt. 2 characters this time, then stopped. And below that, nothing. No description of the ritual performed, no symbol at the end. Only one sentence, written in Mongolian in handwriting she did not recognize as his because it was so careful, so deliberate, like a man writing in a language he was afraid of. Biterig Tanishadaki. I cannot recognize who this is. She sat with this for a long time. She read it as failure, a shaman losing his grip on the entity he was negotiating with, unable to name it, unable to complete the ritual because he could not identify what he was completing it for. This was the reading that made sense. This was the reading that let her father be a man who had tried and failed at something difficult, which was a thing she could hold. She turned to the back page because she was looking for the ownership inscription he always wrote in the backs of his books. His name, the year, a single phrase she had never understood that translated roughly as in case of loss, return to the sky. The inscription was there, but below it, pressed into the last page with such evenness that she almost missed it in the low light, was a handprint. Not drawn, pressed. The heel of the palm, the spread of 4 fingers, the thumb extended slightly outward. The particular geometry of a specific hand she had held as a child when crossing roads and had not held since. The ink was black, the same ink as the journal entries, but when she brought the page close, she could see that it was not entirely dry. Not wet, not fresh, just not finished drying. The way something is when it has been sealed against air for a long time, and is only now held open, beginning to complete the process. She pressed her own hand flat against it without deciding to. Her fingers were longer than his. Her palm was narrower. They did not match, and the not matching was the most specific grief she had felt since arriving. The precise measurement of how much she was not him, and how much she had assumed she was. She called her mother from outside, in the dark, because the inside of the chair had begun to feel like a place where she was being listened to. The phone rang twice. Her mother answered on the second ring, which was unusual. Her mother let things ring. Sarnai opened her mouth to speak. "I dreamed about the drum last night," her mother said. "Don't open it." Sarnai looked down at the drum leaning against the chair wall beside her. She had already opened it. She just didn't know it yet. Inside the drum's hollow, wrapped in a strip of blue silk, was a photograph of a child she recognized before she understood why. It took 4 seconds. The face, the coat, the specific way the girl was standing, slightly turned, as though she had been about to walk away when someone called her back for the picture. Sarnai knew that coat, burgundy wool, 2 buttons missing from the left cuff. She had worn it every winter until she was 8, and she had loved it with the total unself-conscious love of children for objects. And she had not thought about it in 27 years. The girl in the photograph was 7. The photograph was inside her father's drum. These 2 facts arrived separately, and then together, and the joining of them was the worst moment she had experienced in a week of increasingly bad moments. She set the photograph on the cot beside her and looked back into the hollow. The drum was her father's own design. He had carved the larch-wood body himself, which was unusual. Most Mongolian frame drums were open-backed, the skin simply stretched across a shallow ring. Her father's instrument had depth, a cavity. She had asked him about it once, when she was young, and he had said only that some negotiations needed a place to put things. She had understood this at 9 to be a poetic explanation. She understood it differently now. From the cavity she removed, one by one, the photograph. A child's incisor tooth, small as a pebble, slightly yellowed, and the blue silk, kadag, the same ceremonial textile used to wrap the wrists of the dead before burial, now folded into a precise square the size of her palm. She placed all 3 on the cot and sat back on her heels and breathed through her nose the way she had learned to breathe when she needed to keep her hands steady. The silk was stained, not with blood. She had assumed blood, and the assumption had been wrong. The stain was amber-colored and dry, faintly sweet when she brought it close, the residue of something fermented. Arki, fermented mare's milk, the offering shamans left inside the drum hollow when negotiating with a spirit directly, not poured on the ground, not offered outward, but sealed inside, so that the entity would stay within the instrument long enough to be addressed. The tooth was hers. She knew this not because she remembered losing it. She had lost several teeth that year, all of them the ordinary losses of a 7-year-old, but because her father had kept it. She knew, with the knowledge that arrives through reasoning but through the body, that he had kept it the same way she knew whose coat was in the photograph and whose small, serious face was turned slightly away from the camera, as if already prepared to leave. He had not been negotiating for a patient. He had been negotiating for her, the thing he had been trying to protect her from. She did not know its name, did not know its nature, did not know whether it was something that had always been near her or something he had drawn close by accident in some earlier Zasal. That thing now knew her name, not from the photograph, not from the tooth, from the ritual itself, which he had begun and not completed, and which had therefore transferred everything named inside it forward, along the only line that remained. Gantilga had told her, to the next of blood. She sat on the edge of the cot for a long time, with her father's hadag across her knees and the photograph face up beside her. And she thought about a man who had spent 6 weeks trying to finish something without telling his daughter it had ever started. She set the drum against the wall before she slept. She did not know why she didn't put it outside, or in the other room, or back in the wooden box. She told herself it was because she wasn't done with it. At midnight she woke to a sound, one beat. Interior, low, patient. Not the struck sound of something hit, but the sound of something that had always been inside the frame, pressing once against the skin to see if anyone was still awake. The drum sat against the wall, exactly where she had left it. Nothing near it, nothing moved. She lay back down and looked at the ceiling and listened to the silence that followed. And it was the silence of something that had received its answer. She did not decide to go back. She was simply outside Gantulga's door before the sky had fully separated from the ground, the drum under her arm, her boots still unlaced. The light at that hour in Ovorkhangi is not dark and not dawn. It is the color of something held in the mouth too long, bluish and thin, and it makes everything look like it is waiting to be something else. Sarnai stood at the worn door frame and raised her fist to knock, and the door opened before she touched it. Gantulga was dressed. The lamp was lit. There was tea already poured on the low table, 2 bowls, both warm. She did not say she had been expecting her. She didn't need to. They sat across from each other the way women sit when there is serious work ahead. Not facing, not turned away, somewhere between. Gantulga looked at the drum for a long moment before she spoke. When she did, her voice was the same as it had been the day before. Slow, word by deliberate word, as though she were setting each one down somewhere it would hold. She said that as a sal completed in the ordinary way ended in resolution. The negotiation finished, the harm identified, the entity acknowledged and released. But a zassal completed after breach was different. It did not undo. It did not erase. It only closed. And it could only be closed by the one whose name had been placed inside the bargain. He used your name, Sarnai said. It was not a question. He used your name, Gantulga agreed. The 3 drum beats were not dramatic. That was the first thing she had to understand. They were not summoning beats. Not the hard ceremonial strikes she had heard as a child when her father performed for the village. These were smaller, interior. Gantulga showed her the grip first, 2 fingers and the heel of the palm. The beater angled slightly inward and explained that the sound was meant to travel down, not out, into the frame, into the hollow. The first beat meant, you have been seen. The second meant, you are real. The third meant, what was promised will not be given, but here is the name of the one who promised it. And then? Sarnai asked. Then you say your name into the opening, so it knows the difference between the offer and the one who was offered. Sarnai looked at the drum's hollow frame. The opening was small, a gap in the larch-wood her father had left deliberately, Gantulga said, the way all negotiating shamans left a gap, so that what entered during ritual could also leave. She had wondered, as a child, why his drum had that gap. He had never explained it. She knelt on the felt floor. The lamp threw her shadow long behind her. She held the drum the way Gantulga had shown her, and she struck it once, and the sound went down and inward, exactly as described. A sound you felt more than heard. Twice. 3 times. Then she leaned forward and spoke her own name into the hollow. Not loudly, not in the voice she used for other people, but in the voice that had no performance in it, the one that only comes out when no one is watching. And the drum went quiet. Not the silence of before, the held-breath silence that preceded a hum. This was different. This was the silence on the other side of a door that has been properly shut, and she understood, without being told, that it would not open again. She walked to her father's grave alone, in the early light, the drum at her side. She placed it face down on the mound of earth above him, the act of korulolot Gantulga had called it. The returning of an object's power to the ground rather than to a living hand. Not buried, just laid down, returned. Behind her, walking back, the dust held exactly 4 prints. 2 left, 2 right, only hers. She left the drum on her father's grave, its face down in the dirt, and understood for the first time that some things her father had carried were never his to finish, only hers to put down. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.